Hello, 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 and welcome to Immortal Monsters, the podcast shedding candlelight on cryptids, hauntings, mythology, and more. If it is weird, we are talking about it. This is your host, Donna. I am a thriller and suspense author who hasn't slept in about a month. But there is much to do, and I have some fantasy thrillers coming out that this year, 2023, which is when this episode will officially release into the world. And my switch to fantasy thrillers is the very reason for this podcast. I'll be doing research, compiling notes, and sharing what I learn with you. Resources will be listed in the show notes of each episode, so you can check those out if you'd like to dig deeper into any of the topics that I cover on the show. Having said that, today's episode is infamous, noisy, and oft misunderstood. That's right. We are taking ourselves a shallow dive into Poltergeist. But first, let me introduce a new segment of the show. This is called Prerogative. It's where I tell you one thing and then do another. For all of you watching the video version of this show on YouTube, the messaging I've been sending out is for you to subscribe to my Donna Books channel, where I will post episodes of Immortal Monsters under the Immortal Monsters playlist. I've instructed you to do this because I was adamant that I would not manage two YouTube channels. Not in the beginning when everything is so new and I'm trying to get into the flow of the show and I'm figuring out how to even do the audio and the video. But I had an epiphany. Some of you might call it common sense. You see, it finally occurred to me that I should separate all of my author ramblings from the podcast ramblings before I build up either platform, for the sake of less confusion. So even though I swore a blood oath to my own self-assuredness, I have now started a YouTube channel specifically for this show. It is cleverly named Immortal Monsters. So if you subscribe to my Donna Books page because you want this show and you couldn't care less about my also serious author related videos, I am begging you to now please subscribe to my new Immortal Monsters YouTube channel. You can unsubscribe from the book channel, or if you like my ramblings and you don't care about the topic, stay subscribed to both channels. But this episode number 2 of the Immortal Monsters podcast, will be the last one that I post under the Donna Books channel playlist. So moving forward, they will all be on the brand new, shiny Immortal Monsters YouTube channel. If you are a first-time listener and you're only here for the weird stuff, only subscribe to the Immortal Monsters channel. Thank you. And yes, I am sorry. Yes, I am ashamed. Heap coals on my head if you would like, because I'm pretty cold natured, so that just sounds toasty to me. Now that I have walked you through one shame, we'll return to today's show topic so that I can tell you about another shameful thing I am guilty of, and that is fear. For as long as I've known about poltergeist, I have been wholeheartedly afraid of them. In fact, if you look up the term scaredy cat in your dictionary, you will find a picture of me cowering not only from poltergeist, but also from scary movies and truly evil entities like spiders. Listen, there is no need for 8 legs. It's just creepy. I mean, if Australia was plagued by poltergeist instead of spiders, I would have already booked that trip, especially now that I've put a little time into researching poltergeist, because of the part of the research that I'm going to choose to identify with. And that is the part where poltergeist have nothing to do with one evil thing I always thought they were associated with: leprechauns. Okay, I'm kidding, but I'm also stalling because a long time ago, a very wise and godly woman told me that she was taught that if you talk about the big bad D's, you guys know the ones I'm talking about, the DEMONSs, that you are inviting them into your life. I am not trying to do that, but much like I never connected leprechauns to fairies for some unascertainable reason, I have always connected the big D's to poltergeist. So from here on out, because this is sort of a family show and I can hear you gutter-minded people snickering from here, we are going to refer to those particular entities as demons. I know I'm super clever with names. Please hold your applause. We need to get down to business and focus on what's really important here, which is not letting the demons figure out that we are talking about them, because real peril or imagined, it is better to live by superstition than to be taken over by a legion of darkness. So me being afraid to even look into this topic, but feeling obligated to do so after posting a Patreon where I spoke about an experience I had as a young teen, I was pleasantly surprised when I realized I had been profiling poltergeist all wrong. Poltergeist and demons do not go hand in hand. There are people who disagree, and that's fine. I choose to believe that they are not connected because that is what makes me feel better, but you do you. So, poltergeist, what are they, and should you be afraid? Here we go, and all of the mispronunciations are my own. Poltergeist is a word of German origin coming from the joining of two terms. Poltern, meaning to knock or to make sound or to rumble, and Geist, meaning spirit. In ghost lore, this loosely translates to rumbling ghost or noisy spirit. René Soudray, a French journalist, writer, and parapsychologist who interpreted mental and physical phenomena of mediums as evidence for clairvoyance and psychic forces, used a Greek term meaning to make noise or uproar or to throw into confusion to coin thoribism as a synonym for poltergeist. I am going to keep calling them poltergeist, but if you are studying this topic, thoribism is another term you can use to search for information. There are historical accounts of people claiming to be harassed and tormented by spirits dating back to the 1st century. But accounts of poltergeist activity became more common in the early 17th century, a century that bore witness to events such as the crowns of England and Scotland uniting, the ship known as the Mayflower bringing pilgrims to North America, and the fall of China's Ming Dynasty. Another event of the early 17th century was Europe's 30-Year War. Though this war involved many nations across Europe fighting for many reasons, it was in large part a religious war. I'm bringing this up because in times of war, it's common for spiritual type ideas to blossom. We saw this in the United States during and directly after the Civil War, with even presidents of our country known to participate in such things like seances. For all we know, they still are. It is also important to understand what was happening in the world at the time when something is said to have spiked, because the rise of an idea does not make it either true or false. Twitter can go on a rampage saying that spiders aren't scary, but that doesn't make it true. Spiders are Satan's spawn. This is known. Some variation of poltergeist folklore is found in many different cultures. I tried to find some of the oldest accounts, but most of what can be easily found on the internet only dates back to the early 1600s, and those are fairly known accounts. Cases such as the Glenluce Devil, where an incident took place at the home of Gilbert Campbell in October of 1654 after he turned away a beggar named Alexander Agnew. Alexander supposedly vowed to cause the Gilbert family harm, and over the next couple of years, strange phenomena reportedly happened in the home. Researchers widely dismissed this case as a hoax, and historian David Demroche noted that Alexander Agnew, the beggar in the story, was called the Jock of Broad Scotland. He was the first person in Scottish history to publicly deny the existence of God, and he was hanged at Dumfries for blasphemy on May 21st, 1656. So this case alone shows you that people were being persecuted over religious ideology during the very time when poltergeist activity supposedly spiked. Another well-known case is the Drummer of Tedworth. This is a 1661 account from John Mompesson, owner of a house in the town of Tedworth, now called Tidworth in Wiltshire or Wiltshire. Mompesson sued an unlicensed vagrant drummer named William Drury, accusing Drury of collecting money by false pretenses. Mompesson won his lawsuit, and Drury's drum was confiscated by the local bailiff. Mompesson then found his house plagued by nocturnal drumming noises. A man by the name of Glanville, who later published this account, visited the home in 1663 and claimed to hear scratching noises under a bed in the children's room. Rumors spread that the drummer, who was associated with a band of gypsies, used witchcraft to plague the man who had his drum taken away. Mompesson seems to have denied that the account of having been bewitched was true, but he didn't trouble himself with saying so at the height of the commotion because he was getting a lot of attention over this. The takeaway from this particular case is that I really love the song Gypsy by Shakira. It is so good. Most of the early poltergeist accounts seem to have been debunked. I have one that I'm going to share in detail with you later in the show, but for now, let's talk about the characteristics of a poltergeist, because they are not only reported to be rare and oft misunderstood, but it seems that most of their activity is wrongly credited to a haunting by a mischievous spirit or a ghost. Firstly, poltergeists are not spirits. Theories suggest that poltergeists are masses of energy that a living person is unknowingly controlling. Modern science and mostly fields dubbed as pseudosciences are attempting to confirm that poltergeist activity can be explained by psychokinesis, also known as telekinesis. The branch of science that studies things like psychokinesis is parapsychology. This is where they study all manner of psychic phenomena, such as extrasensory perception, telepathy, precognition, clairvoyance, and other paranormal claims, such as near-death experiences and synchronicity. Today, we are dealing with psychokinesis as it relates to poltergeist. Psychokinesis is reported to manifest during times of emotional disturbance. We see this portrayed in movies and books a lot. A witch can't harness their powers unless their life is in danger, or a fire starter gets angry and accidentally torches their house. This joining of psychokinesis to emotional stress is why most poltergeist activity is blamed on there being a teenage girl in a home. Look, I get it. I am a highly emotional human, and that's a trait more commonly associated with females. But every time I hear this argument, I cringe inside. The only reason females are more known for their emotional states than men is because females have a larger capacity to express feelings. Instead of sitting around talking about stupid things like bodily noises and sports, we talk about important things. What, you don't believe me? A study published in PubMed noted that men and women speak an equal amount of words each day. The only recorded conversations that the researchers could bear to listen to were those of the women. Okay, so I made that last little bit up, but there really is a study that says that men and women do talk the same number of words each day. And what I've learned in my time of walking this earth is that men are much more emotionally disturbed than women. My show, my theories. If teenage girls are the cause of poltergeist activity, it would be great if they could learn how to control these sadistic balls of energy, because forget about the zombie apocalypse, we would be going down in a blaze of poltergeist glory. But sadly, the type of kinetic energy needed to manifest a poltergeist is unexplained, and usually whatever angsty teenager is whipping this energy into a frenzy is the target of the poltergeist. The paranormal activity will center around them and commonly only takes place when they are present. If the frenzied energy person leaves the location, the activity normally stops because the person is no longer there to manifest or to influence the poltergeist. If the angsty person is able to relieve whatever emotional turmoil earned them the haunting in the first place, the poltergeist will oftentimes go away entirely. Therefore, poltergeists are said to haunt a particular person rather than a location. However, it is possible that if a place is particularly haunted, which I believe means there would be a certain amount of energy in this area, a poltergeist will flare back up when the right person comes along. As I said earlier, the person causing the phenomena is doing so subconsciously, and they're not usually aware that they are even the catalyst. But some people think a poltergeist doesn't involve a disturbed individual at all, but that it is, in fact, an actual spirit. Whether or not poltergeist activity is linked to negative entities comes down to if you believe psychokinesis is causing the activity or if it is actually occurring from an unseen, troubled spirit or ghost. From what we learned earlier, if it's a spirit, then it's a haunting and not a poltergeist. But can a poltergeist event conjure a spirit? This is the question. Is it possible that paranormal activity from a poltergeist event can open a doorway for other things? Is evil drawn to the poltergeist? I told you earlier that I heard if you talk about certain things, you invite them into your life. So if you have a link into your subconscious that is manifesting a telekinetic event, is that a beacon that draws other paranormal things to you? Is this why poltergeists are so misunderstood? They hit the scene and they're just there like, hey, you called me. I am here to help deal with your inner turmoil. And then the next thing you know, the demons swarm. Many famed paranormal researchers say poltergeists are, in fact, demonic. These researchers completely disregard the theory that it has anything to do with a psychological manifestation because their theory makes for better TV. Alan Kardec, the founder of Spiritism, says that poltergeists are manifestations of disembodied spirits of the low level belonging to the sixth class of the third order. Under this explanation, they are believed to be closely associated with the elements of fire, air, water, and earth. Psychoanalyst Carl Gustav Jung, or Hung, believed that one of his female cousins' trance states was responsible for breaking a bread knife and splitting a dining table in two. During a meeting that he had with Sigmund Freud in 1909, a bookcase gave an explosive cracking sound, and Hung correctly predicted that there would be a second sound, speculating that such phenomena were caused by exteriorization of his subconscious mind. So basically, he was saying, I did that using the power of my mind. Freud disagreed, concluding that there was a perfectly rational and natural cause, like the wood of the bookcase contracting as it dried out. Wood shrinkage is a real thing, but back to poltergeist. What are they capable of? Well, first of all, they start off slow, kind of calm and subtle. You might get some tapping noises, a little knocking, sounds happening around you with no visible cause of said sound. At this stage, they are playful and not harmful. Then the activity starts to become more intense. This is where I think if your kinetically adept mind is capable of sending out an open invitation for hauntings, you've drawn more to you than a frenzied ball of energy. But for now, we are going to pretend that everything that comes next is just the poltergeist getting angry because you refuse to drop the angst. The poltergeist is now vocalizing. You're hearing voices and even seeing apparitions. Stationary objects like household items and furniture are being moved, doors are slamming, lights are turning off, which I have had a flipping lot of lately and multiple times just while I was typing up the notes for this show. Maybe I'm just haunted. From here, it only gets worse. Now things are escalating to where walls are shaking, water is dripping from the ceiling, and fires are breaking out. Furniture isn't just sliding across the floor anymore, it's getting thrown, destroyed, and that bed you're hiding in is getting shook up like a bottle of something you have to shake well before opening. If you're still not getting the memo and you're holding onto your emotional turmoil, you are getting ready to get bit. That's right, because poltergeists are capable of manipulating the physical world around them, and that includes you. They pinch, bite, hit, levitate, and even trip you because at this point, they just don't care. It is the Wild West, and they're letting it all hang out, including their foul smells. You think that scratch down your back is bad? Wait until the stench hits you. Again, I ask, are poltergeists downright cruel, or are you conjuring up other bad things with your balls of energy? Because there have been reports of people finding glass shards on their pillows and thumbtacks under their bed sheets. So if you're being haunted by anything, stay out of the bed. They're either going to booby trap it or levitate it, so don't give them that satisfaction. The good news in all of this is that poltergeist activity builds to this horrific climax and then it's over because they don't want you gone from this earthly plane. They can't manifest again if you aren't here. So they torment, give you a break, and then start all over again, right from the top with that little tap, 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 inflicting mental terror before they ever build back up to the height of their physical torment. I love warm and fuzzy stories. I'm so glad I get to share them with you guys. The vast paranormal activity associated with the poltergeist haunting gives researchers an excellent opportunity to document strange phenomena, which is great for them, but not so great for the victim or victims, as depicted in one of the most famous accounts of a poltergeist attacking a family, the Bell Witch case that started in 1817. I'm not actually sure why this one is categorized as a poltergeist because apparently the witch herself spoke. So this by definition is a haunting and not a poltergeist. But honestly, I don't even think it's a haunting. I think the Bell Witch is a case of a bad man being tormented by his family and the people he enslaved, with other bad men who came to his aid also being tricked. We all know how easy it is to be spooked when you are predisposed to thinking there's something to be afraid of. I am predisposed, so please, if I am wrong about this, Belle, the good witch, do not come for me. Honestly, I love your work, and that curse you used, perfection. Some other famous cases are the Michaela Ghost, a 1946 case which received attention in the press at the time, and also the Devils of Martin, a late 19th century case for which affidavits were obtained in court. Samuel Palaharu recorded a memoir of a typical poltergeist, the case of Salko Nila from the south of Lake Inari, in his book, Memoirs of Lapland. The story has also been published in the collection of mythical stories. If anyone knows of a translated copy of this book that I can purchase, please let me know. I'm going to list some other cases in the show notes for you so you can take a look at those if you want to. But right now, we are going to take a semi-deep dive into the Ring-Croft Poltergeist. This one is also known as the Rerrick, Rerrick, or Rerwick, Rerwick poltergeist, or the Mackie poltergeist. A minister named Alexander Telfair wrote a pamphlet about this case as an eyewitness himself to almost all of the events. And I'm going to start us off by reading the beginning of this pamphlet to you. It is adeptly named A True Relation of an Apparition, Expressions and Actings of a Spirit, which infested the house of Andrew Mackie in Ring-Croft of Stocking in the parish of Rerrick in the stewartry of Kirkcudbright in Scotland by Mr. Alexander Telfair, minister of that parish and attested by many other persons who were also eye and ear witnesses. It's a long and effective title, and it was printed by George Mossman to be sold at his shop in the Parliament Closs 1696. If you are in Scotland and you live near this place, go check out the site. Ring-Croft of Stocking, where this took place, was situated on a rise to the northwest of Auchencarn Auchencairin. Back then, it was part of the former parish of Rarick, a traditional wind-blown oak atop the ridge known as the last of the Auchencarn ghost trees, marks the site of the Mackie farm today. The earliest ordnance survey map of the area, published in 1849, shows a structure some distance down from the crest of Stocking Hill, marked as the Ring, or known also as the Ring End or Ringen. This is now in ruins, but it was occupied as late as 1841 and may have marked the actual site of Andrew Mackie's house. As I summarize Telfair's pamphlet for you, know that I've read this in its entirety, and I'm linking to it in the show notes so that you may have the same pleasure. We're starting off with Telfair's 5 reasons for even writing down this poltergeist account, because that's what he started the pamphlet with. But before we get into those reasons, I will say that skeptics of this account claim it is a hoax with a touch of practical joking mixed in by a child that was present in the home who was confirmed to have been a student of ventriloquism. Furthermore, Telfair and the other ministers in the area at the time were worried about atheism, considering it dangerous, and therefore it's speculated that even if Telfair knew this account to be false, he leaned into it and recorded it in order to further his own agenda. I do not wholeheartedly disagree with this assessment. Telfair lays out his intentions pretty clearly in his reasonings, but does his ambition make the account false or merely exploited? You decide. Telfair starts out quoting scripture such as James 4:7, resist the devil and he will flee from you. Then he states, I assure you, it is contrary to my genius, all circumstances being considered, to appear in print to the view of the world. Yet these motives have prevailed with me to publish the following relation, beside the satisfying of some reverend brethren in the ministry and several worthy Christians. Translation, I am not making this up. I don't even want my name in print for all the world to see, but I have very important reasons for writing and publishing this pamphlet, which I'm getting ready to tell you about. Also, I'm being peer pressured by my peers and some very devout Christians. Telfair's reason number 1. The conviction and confutation of that prevailing spirit of atheism and infidelity in our time, denying both in opinion and practice the existence of spirits, either of God or of devils, and consequently a heaven and a hell, and imputing the voices, apparitions, and actings of good or evil spirits to the melancholic disturbance or distemper of the brains and fancies of those who pretend to hear, see, and feel them. The translation here is stop calling ghosts crazy, because if you don't believe in evil, then you won't believe in good, which means you don't care about my God. And that really made Telfair pretty upset. Reason number 2, to give occasion to all who read this to bless the Lord, who hath sent a stronger, even Christ Jesus, than the strong man, to bind him and spoil him of his goods, and to destroy the works of the devil, and even by these things wherein Satan thinks to propagate his kingdom of darkness, to discover, weaken, and bring it down. Translation, a story arc needs a bad guy and a hero and something for them to fight over, like a kingdom, and soldiers to do said fighting, which according to Telfair's first sentence is all who read this. But you are not reading this pamphlet right now, so don't worry. You cannot be drafted for listening. Signing up to keep the kingdom from falling to the dark side remains totally your choice. Moving on to Telfair's reason number 3. He is writing this pamphlet to induce all persons, particularly masters of families, to private and family prayer. lest the neglect of it provoke the Lord, nor only to pour out his wrath upon them otherwise, but to let Satan loose to haunt their persons and families with audible voices, apparitions, and to hurt their persons and goods. The translation for this one is pretty simple. If you do not pray, you are responsible for the poltergeist plaguing your family. Reason number 4, that ministers and congregations where the gospel is in any measure in purity and power may be upon their guard to wrestle according to the word of God against these principalities and powers and spiritual wickednesses who still seek to mar the success and fruit of the gospel, sometimes by force and sometimes by fraud, sometimes secretly and sometimes openly. And for these ends, learn to know his wiles and put on the whole armor of God, that they may be able to debate with him. The translation is, read your Bible and you will be able to wrestle with devils in your life and argue with Satan. Telfair's 5th and final reason, that all who are by the goodness of God saved from these audible voices, apparition, or hurts from Satan may learn to ascribe praise and glory to God, who leads them not into temptation, but delivers them from evil. And that this true and attested account of Satan's methods in this place may carry to the forsaked ends. The translation here is that if you are not being haunted, give credit to God, and also give people a copy of this pamphlet so that it can be world renowned. Telfair signs this pamphlet in the earnest prayer of a weak laborer in the work of the gospel in that place, and your servant for Christ's sake, Alexander Telfair, Edinburgh, December 1695. Okay, so I'm being a bit cheeky here, but we can easily see why skeptics call bull on this account. But again, Telfair's motivation doesn't necessarily mean there wasn't a haunting in Edinburgh. So what happened? Telfair says that many people desired to know the truth of the matter, and that not only was he pressed upon by his peers, but inaccurate accounts of what happened were being told even to him. So for the sake of stopping misinformation, he wrote the following true accounts of the actions of the evil spirit plaguing the family of Andrew Mackie. He starts off by saying that the rumor of Mr. Mackie devoting his first child to the devil is untrue. Telfair says that Mackie is outwardly moral and he knows nothing of lies. His communications are honest, civil, and harmless, and Mackie's neighbors do delight in his company. He goes on to refute another rumor, saying that whereas a woman did leave some clothing in the Mackie home and then died before her belongings could be returned to her, he put the Mackie's feet to the fire and questioned them heavily on the matter. Telfair believed Mackie and his wife when they said that they gave all of the woman's belongings to her friends and kept no portion for themselves. So basically he's saying they're not liars, they're not thieves, so the haunting wasn't anything that was brought on by their own deeds. There's also mention of a tooth buried in the threshold that was rumored to be the cause of the trouble in the home. This rumor came from the son of a man who used to live in the home. I'm not going to go into detail on this, but it seems that a Telfair owned this home between the time when this man's father and the Mackies lived there. And Thomas Telfair, who I assume is a relation of Alexander Telfair, writing this pamphlet, says that he did dig up something that resembled a tooth, but that it didn't look like any tooth from a man or an animal that he compared it with. He threw this tooth in the fire and it burned like a candle, or as if made from tallow. So I think this was put into the pamphlet in order to debunk there being a curse on the home itself, because the narrative of an evil spirit fits better that way. And also, the thing that resembled an unknown tooth was already burned by the time the Mackie haunting begins. This one's going to be a little bit rough. I have a little bit of a dry throat, so my voice is a little crackly, and I already have one of those like nasally voices where I have to speak very slowly or my words do not come out properly. So bear with me, guys. This one's going to be a long one. To start, the pamphlet describes beasts that kept getting loose during the night. Cattle and sheep are mentioned later in the pamphlet, so I assume this is the cattle, but whatever they were tied up at night, and by morning, they were loose. Mackie made stronger bindings, and that didn't help. Then he moved these beasts to a new location and woke up the next day to find one of the animals tied up so tightly that it couldn't move. On another night, a fire pit of sorts was built in the middle of the floor of the home, the smoke from the fire waking the family, but inexplicably, none of them heard the fire being built. On March 7th, stones were thrown into the house. The pamphlet makes this sound like there were a lot of stones thrown and in all parts of the house so that no one could determine from where they came. This stone throwing continued and sometimes happened in the daytime, though it usually occurred at night. On the Saturday following the start of the stone throwing, the children ran into the home and saw what they thought was a person sitting by the fire. This person had a blanket over them. One of the children, a boy of 9 or 10, chided the others for being afraid. He said that they should bless themselves and give fear no ground to stand upon. I like this kid. The blanket was his, so he went over and yanked it away from what ended up being a stool. Later, the crook and pot clips were taken away. They were found 4 days later. I don't really know what this is, but I think we're talking about the hooks and the things that would have been inside of the fireplace to hang pots on in those days. If you happen to know for sure, then let me know. I would appreciate it. Stones started being thrown at people mostly when they were praying. These stones were said to weigh less than a rock of their size should have. Mackie told Telfair about this after church one day, so on the Tuesday afterward, Telfair went to the home and prayed twice. Nothing happened. Later, Telfair was outside by the barn talking to a couple of men, and he saw some stones fall. Immediately afterward, people ran from the house crying that rocks were being thrown at them. Brave as he is, Telfair re-entered the home. This time, when he prayed, he got hit. But he wasn't concerned because the stones were very small and they didn't hurt him at all. This kind of trouble continued for the Mackies until the 18th of March when the stones got larger, leaving people sore. The larger stones continued to be thrown until the 21st of March when Telfair went to the home, staying the greater part of the night. He was hit with stones and other objects, struck several times on the sides and shoulders, and hit sharply with a great staff so that those who were present heard the strokes as he was being hit. Listen, when a ghost throws something at you, no matter if it hurt you or not, just say that it did, or they are going to keep upping their game and you're not going to like it. Because on this night, Telfair didn't just get beaten. Whatever was in the home began to bang upon the boards. While in prayer at his bedside, Telfair felt something on his arm. He looked over and saw a little white hand all the way up to the crook of its elbow. When he saw this hand, it vanished. At this point in the pamphlet, Telfair says that from the start of all this trouble to the end, though many things were heard, the only things ever seen were the hand that touched him, a young man with a red face and yellow hair looking in a window that a friend of the Mackies saw, and a young man about the age of 14 with gray clothes and a bonnet on his head that several people reported seeing. On the 22nd of March, the activity increased against the family and any neighbors coming to visit them. These neighbors were hit with stones and beaten with staves, thus cutting short any visitations. However, some of the visitors were attacked when they both came and went, such as was the case with Thomas Telfair, the man who burned the tooth. He was hit with a stone that left a mark on his brow, shoved in the shoulders multiple times, and because he wasn't giving this entity the fear it so rightly wanted to evoke in him, he was grabbed by the hair, nails scratching against his skin, and he was dragged by his clothing. Similarly, this entity clutched the side of a man named John so tightly that he screamed out, begging for help and declaring that this thing was going to rip his side clean off of him. That night, while the children were sleeping, it lifted their clothing and beat them on the hips so terribly that all who were in the house heard it. The pamphlet does not say that anyone in the house helped the children. So I'm guessing people were just listening to them screaming, and then the next day the adults kind of asked them what all the crying was about. I really don't like this part, and it only gets more disturbing from here. Objects are being moved around in the house, stones are being thrown, there are beatings of both people and inanimate objects with staffs, and all of this continues through April the 2nd, when this entity adds vocalization. It starts saying, wished, wished, at the end of every prayer, doing it so loudly that the dog hears this and runs to the door barking, almost as if he thinks that somebody outside of the home is calling him. On the 4th of April, this poltergeist whistled and cried, wished, several times. This was crossing a line for Charles, Mr. Mackie's landlord. Charles went to several ministers, told them what was happening, and they held public prayer for the Mackie family. A couple of ministers even went to the house, spending the night fasting and praying, but they were hit with stones. Andrew Award was hit twice in the head. Bleeding, but still praying, his wig was snatched right off his head. Later, when holding a napkin, presumably to dab at the blood on his head, a stone was thrown into the napkin, ripping it from his hands. John Murdo received several strokes, but Telfair graciously tells us that the bruises and wounds that John got that night healed. So I guess he's saying, no big deal, John got off easy. He also says that there was no one in the house that night who escaped the fury and the cruelty. In fact, embers were thrown among the people, and in the morning when they were rising from prayer, stones poured down on them. On April 5th, straw in the barnyard was set on fire. That night, while the house was filled with neighbors, stones continued to be thrown. Mrs. Mackie went with her husband to fetch wood for a fire that they actually wanted to set. And upon returning, she stepped on a stone that she'd never known to be loose before. And she set her mind on finding out what was beneath this stone tomorrow, because tonight she has a house full of neighbors who haven't learned their lesson. April the 6th, when the house was quiet, Mrs. Mackie went to the stone. Underneath it, she found 7 small bones with blood and some flesh, all closed and wrapped up nice in a piece of old settled paper. She said that the blood was fresh and bright. When I first read this, I thought this was probably animal bones and somebody playing a prank. But then I read the next little bit, and now I'm thinking that this might have been a baby. I am sorry, my mind goes to dark places, and I don't like it either. But the sight of this bloody bundle troubled Mrs. Mackie so much that she put it back. She puts it right back under the stone, and then she runs off, not to her husband, but to a man named Colleen, his house being a quarter of a mile from hers. While she was gone, the haunting was worse than it ever had been, with not only stones being thrown, but fireballs. This was happening inside and outside the house. But whenever the fire lit something up, it vanished. So that's why I'm thinking that maybe this is an affair and she ran off to tell her lover what she did to their child. And then her husband kind of went berserk while she was gone. I mean, it's either that or it's a poltergeist or a haunting of some sort. A hot stone was thrown into the bed between the children and it did some damage. It burned through the bedclothes, and after the eldest son had taken it out of the bed, the stone lay in the floor for more than an hour and a half, after which it is said that it still could not be held in the hand because of how hot it was. A staff was thrust into the wall of the house above the children's bed and shook over them. When Colleen, the person Mama Mackie ran to, came to the house, he went straight into prayer. He wasn't touching those bones until he prayed over them. But as soon as he spoke his first words, it said that the poltergeist was at its most cruel. So Colleen picked up the bones, and then the trouble ceased. Telfair heard of this and he set off for the Mackie's house immediately. He too went straight into prayer when he got there and was hit with stones. But he notes that they did not hurt him, and he says that that night there was no more trouble in the Mackie home. April the 7th. This is the Sabbath, and everything began anew. Stones were thrown, wounding a blacksmith on the head. It also cast a plow sock at him, and worse than that, a trough of some sort that was reported to weigh upwards of 3 stone, which is about 42 pounds, fell upon his head. But Telfair says that he was not hurt. I think the blacksmith was the typical Scot, big bone, so 42 pounds falling on your head, totally fine. According to eyewitness William McMinn, the Mackie house was set on fire twice, but no one was hurt, and neighbors present in the house helped to put out the fire. That night at twilight, as Mackie and his eldest son were coming near the house, an extraordinary light fell upon them. It went before the Mackies to the house with a swift motion, and their haunting continued according to the manner described this far. April 8th, in the morning, Andrew Mackie went down to the cloths and found a letter both written and sealed in blood. This letter spoke of repentance and fleeing, and later that day, the people still alive who had lived in the Mackie home since it was built about 28 years prior were gathered by the civil magistrate. There was some suspicion of murder being committed. This suspicion came from the bones being discovered and this letter, but nothing was ever found to be true in that regard, probably because Colleen had connections. Telfair didn't say that, but I am, because I'm going to stick with this whole affair theory. On April the 9th, the letter and bones were sent to the ministers, who were all occasionally at Kirkcudbright. They appointed 5 of themselves to go with Telfair to the Mackie home. They planned to spend their time in the home fasting and praying. But when they arrived on April the 10th, Telfair had no more than opened his mouth when he was hit with a stone. Then everyone in the house was under attack, but none more than Telfair. The stones came often and with such force that it made the entire house shake. Holes were smashed into wood, and the thatch on the house was torn through with great stones. One fell on a minister's back, but it weighed only a quarter of what it should have, so he wasn't hurt. The man started praying with greater force, and the poltergeist answered likewise, hitting him in the chest, but still he was unmoved. It's okay to laugh here. I did too, because the number of times that Telfair describes something horrible and then he's like, yeah, but it didn't hurt anybody. It's comical. That night, the wise ministers decided to take turns praying, and brave as they were going to pray while standing under the hole in the ceiling because, as you could imagine, there was more trouble coming from the portal to the outside. So right under that hole was where they're saying the most of the trouble was coming from. The barn, though, joined the house at the end. So while they prayed at this hole, the barn door was broken down and the mid wall, so the wall in between the barn and the house, was destroyed, and stones were thrown into the house from there. Still, according to Telfair, the stones did no harm, which is great because a wall in the house was just ripped open, and now this thing is gripping the legs of one of the ministers as if it has a man's hands. It also hoisted up the feet of others while they were standing on the ground. So I guess it looked like that they were lifting their foot up, but only they were saying, "We are not doing this willingly." This activity continued till 10 o'clock at night. After that, there was no more trouble in the house until Andrew Tate came to stay with the family. On his way there, his dog killed a thulmard, which I believe is the Scottish term for polecat. A polecat is not an actual animal. It's a term used to describe many different small mammals, sort of a regional thing. Usually it's applied to weasel type animals. And yes, if you know about Jeff the talking mongoose, let your mind go straight to where it wants to go. When Tate arrived at the home, he tossed the polecat by the wayside. After that, 3 other young men came to the home. All of them began to pray, and lo and behold, the evil spirit beat them with the dead thulmard. Then it threw it down right in front of them. The 3 young men were terrified, especially one, Samuel Thompson. He was gripped by the side and by the back, and he was shoved, and he felt as if there had been a hand beneath his clothes and in his pockets. Super uncomfortable. You do not have to pray with your eyes closed. Keep them open and watch out for Mr. Mackie, because I'm thinking he is a problem. Samuel was so frightened after being assaulted that he was sick immediately. The 14th of April was again the Sabbath. So the entity made a bonfire in the barnyard and threw stones until 10 o'clock that night. It also threw a dike spade at Andrew Mackie, but he's a lot like Telfair and didn't get hurt. Then something else terrible happened, but I could not understand the words in the pamphlet. So just suffice it to say that Andrew Mackie took hold of something and with great difficulty kept it from doing something bad until the rim is torn out of it and he threw it away. April the 15th, William Anderson and James Patterson, his son-in-law, came to the house. They came with Colleen. Colleen left, and Andrew Mackie sent his sons to convince Colleen to come back. As they returned, they were stoned, not by the herb, but by rocks rolling amongst their legs as if to break them. I don't understand that visual either, but all we need to know is that when these boys came home wounded, William Anderson was praying and he got hit on the head. He was bleeding, and wished was vocalized again by the poltergeist. On April the 16th, the entity continued to cry, "Wished." It also whistled, groaned, and stuck with its signature throwing of stones whenever anyone prayed. It would also cry out words like kick and cuck while shaking men backwards and forwards and hoisting them up off of their knees. The Mackie family finally fled the home, leaving 5 honest neighbors there alone for the night. No harm was done to these brave and innocent neighbors, nor did the Mackie family experience anything evil while they were in hiding. The only harm done was to the cattle. Some of them were bound to stakes, others were loose, and some were tipped over. April 18th, the Mackies returned home. No harm was done to them or their cattle this night, only to the sheep. The sheep were tied together into pairs, ropes made of straw tied around their necks, and the straw used to make these ropes came from a loft in the stable and was carried to the sheep house, which was 3 or 4 pairs of butts distance away. I have no idea how far this is. I tried to look up the term, but the Google results were fairly gross. But there is a city named Butts in the state of Georgia here in the United States. Listen, I'm not laughing. You are laughing. Okay, so April 19th, the straw in the barn was set on fire. Mackie put it out because he was already there in the barn when the fire started. April 20th, more of the same, but this time, whenever the entity wasn't whistling or wishing, it would hit people with stones and say, "Take you that," until you get more. The good part of this new vocalization was that once a person was hit and yelled at, they in fact did not get hit with any more stones for a while. So we do have an honest ghost here. While all of the aforementioned antics continued, the 24th was a day when the activity was particularly brutal. There was no intermission, and all within the house feared they would be killed. On the 25th, stones were thrown all night, but no harm was done. On the 26th, stones were thrown in the evening and there was some knocking, and then the entity began to speak, calling those sitting in the house witches and telling them it would take them to hell. Andrew Mackie was sleeping when this happened, so they woke him up. He heard the voice say, "Thou shalt be troubled till Tuesday." So he asked, "Says who? Who gave thee a commission?" The voice said, "God gave me a commission, and I am sent to warn the land to repent, for a judgment is to come if the land do not quickly repent." This voice said he was commanded to reveal the words upon his peril, and said that if the land did not repent, it would go to its father and get a commission to return with 100 worse than itself, and would trouble every particular family in the land. To those who were with him, Mackie said that if he were to tell any of this, he would not be believed. Then the voice told him to fetch better men, a priest and 2 honest men, and that on Tuesday night he would tell them what he had to say. Then this voice said, "Praise me, and I will whistle to you. Worship me, and I will trouble you no more." Then Andrew Mackie said, "The Lord who delivered the 3 children out of the fiery furnace deliver me and mine this night from the temptations of Satan." Then the voice replied, "You might as well have said Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego," which are the 3 boys in the Bible that Mackie had referenced. So I guess the entity is wanting Mackie to know that he too has Bible knowledge. So while Mackie was speaking to this unseen entity, James Telfair butted in. The entity replied, "You are basely bred, meddling in other men's discourse wherein you are not concerned." It likewise said, "Remove your goods, for I will burn this house." Telfair answered, "The Lord stop Satan's fury and hinder him of his designs." Then the entity said, "I will do it, or you shall guide well." April 27th, the house was set on fire 7 times. The 28th was the Sabbath, and from sunrise to sunset, the house continued to be set on fire. As soon as a fire was quenched in one part of the home, another instantly sprung up somewhere else. That evening, after failing to burn the house down, the entity pulled the whole end of the house down, stonework and all. Then it started a fire in the stable. The children were pulled from their beds by the entity, being gripped hard by the neck and shoulders. It held a big club of wood over their heads and told them that if God had given it the commission to do so, it would bash them over the head. On the 29th, the entity continued setting the house on fire. Andrew Mackie grew tired of dousing all the flames, yet they continued, as attested by others gathered in and around the now ruined home. As Mackie was threshing in the barn, he heard the entity whisper from the wall, and then it cried out, "Andrew, Andrew." He refused to give this creature the satisfaction of an answer, so the thing grew angry and with a mad voice said, "Speak." Still, Mackie gave no answer, so it said, "Be not troubled, you shall have no more trouble, except some casting of stones upon the Tuesday to fulfill the promise I made." About 11 o'clock, there was one more fire, and then there was no more trouble until between 3 and 4 in the morning when 2 little stones dropped down. A little later on, more stones began to be thrown, and then on Tuesday, the 30th day of April, a man named Charles, along with several neighbors, was in the barn. While he was at prayer with his eyes open, he observed a black thing in the corner of the barn. It increased in size as if it would fill the whole house, but he could not discern its form. It was a black cloud existing, scaring them, and then it threw mud in their faces and maybe some feces. It then gripped several people by the middle of their bodies and by their arms, and the grip was so strong that some of them could still feel the grip 5 days later. Wednesday, the 1st of May, the sheep house caught fire, but no sheep were harmed in the burning of this house. After this, it appears all of the activity stopped, and our dear minister Telfair concludes his pamphlet with the words of an apostle. 1 Peter 5, 8, and 9. Be sober, be vigilant, because your adversary, the devil, as a roaring lion, walketh about, seeking whom he may devour, whom resist steadfast in the faith. Throughout the pamphlet, many names are dropped, and Telfair actually does a good job of listing witnesses to most of the described events. I'm still skeptical, though. I think at some points, Mackie himself seems guilty of doing some of the deeds, and parts are really disturbing, especially in regard to the children being harmed. I certainly watch way too much true crime, but this story gave me manipulative abuser vibes. Kids are impressionable, and if their dad did these things to them and then made them swear it was a ghost, I could see where they would be afraid to say anything else. So just a lot of stuff about the story gives me the creeps, whether it's paranormal activity or human. If you have the time, give the pamphlet a read and see what you think. Now we are going to touch on poltergeist skepticism. According to research in anomalistic psychology, poltergeist activity is explained by psychological factors such as illusion, memory lapses, and wishful thinking. A 1998 study concluded that poltergeist experiences are delusions resulting from a person's interpretation of stimuli. And psychologist Donovan Rawcliffe wrote that almost all poltergeist cases that have been investigated turned out to be based on trickery, and the ones that weren't trickery were due to psychological factors such as hallucinations. Skeptic and magician Milbourne Christopher found that some cases of poltergeist activity can be attributed to unusual air currents, such as a 1957 case on Cape Cod where downdrafts from an uncovered chimney became strong enough to blow a mirror off the wall, overturn chairs, and to knock items off of shelves. In the 1950s, Guy William Lambert suggested that poltergeist phenomena could be explained by the movement of underground water causing stress on houses. So researchers Alan Gauld and Tony Cornell tested Lambert's hypothesis and found it to be as ridiculous as it sounds. Neuroscientist Michael Persinger theorized that seismic activity could cause poltergeist phenomena, but no one has ever been able to replicate the results of his supposed research, much like his findings regarding the God helmet. If you are not familiar, the God helmet is an experimental apparatus originally called the Corin helmet after its inventor, Stanley Corin. It was developed by Corin and Persinger to study creativity, religious experience, and the effects of stimulation to the temporal lobes. We're talking about stimulating the cerebral cortex with a weak magnetic field about as strong as what's generated by a hairdryer, which is far weaker than that of a magnet you would stick on your refrigerator. This device has been used in Persinger's research in the field of neurotheology, the study of the supposed neural connections of religion and spirituality. Participants in this experiment sensed a presence while wearing the God helmet, and Persinger reported that many of them claimed to have mystical experiences and altered states. Things that critics explain could simply be the result of the suggestibility of participants, since in attempts to replicate Persinger's claims, some groups used helmets that didn't work or ones they didn't turn on, and some participants still gave the same type of claims about their experiences. The God helmet drew media attention, and you can find some documentaries on it if you are interested in checking that out. David Turner, a retired physical chemist, suggested that ball lightning might cause the spooky movement of objects blamed on poltergeist. Ball lightning is a rare and unexplained phenomena described as luminescent spherical objects that vary from pea-sized to several meters in diameter. Though usually associated with thunderstorms, the observed phenomena is reported to last considerably longer than the split-second flash of a lightning bolt. Descriptions of ball lightning appear in a variety of accounts over the centuries, and some reports describe balls that eventually explode and leave behind an odor of sulfur. Scientists have proposed a number of hypotheses to explain reports of ball lightning, but scientific data on ball lightning remains scarce. I'm going to go out on a limb here and say poltergeist aren't the result of ball lightning, although maybe the mysterious lightning that scientists find hard to replicate does release some form of energy that is later picked up by the telekinetic amongst us. Because that's the part I believe in. I think human beings have the capacity to move items using energy alone, and I do believe that they can do this unwittingly. Here's why. Ages ago, I read some studies that I wish I could link to for you, but I don't recall what journal they were in or what the premise of these studies even was. So I don't have a clue where or how to search for them. But the general takeaways of these studies dealt with nervous system control and measuring what I am going to laymanly refer to as energy fields outside of the body. One study measured this sort of thing by taking couples or even new acquaintances, separating them, and then showing one member of the group, say, a disturbing photo. That person's heart rate would spike, but also their partner, who was not seeing the photograph, would also show a spike. Another study put groups of people in a room together and found that the person who became the leader of the group wasn't the loudest or the most outgoing, nor were they the most charismatic. The person becoming the dominant leader of the group was the person whose nervous system was the most in control. These people unwittingly brought the others under their sphere of influence, and those people's measured data would sync to what the person who is the leader had walked in with. There are many other studies out there on how one person's energy field can affect another. So if you're a bit nerdy like me, dig into those. They are fascinating. So the concept of harnessing the energy inside of us isn't novel. We've heard all about chi, and we often say things like sending good vibes your way. So, on some base level, we are aware of how our energy can affect those around us. For instance, your heart energy can be felt about 3 feet outside of your body. And studies have shown that heart rates will sync up when people are around each other. I have a personal experience with this, and it happens about every single evening. I am a terrible sleeper, always have been. I'm that dolphin chronotype, and there's some sort of other trait like the guardsman or watchman or something. Um, so sleep just isn't something that is a friend of mine. I am very sensitive to sound, light, and movement. I know that I will die early because of not sleeping enough, but this is how I'm wired. And I do actually have the gene to need less sleep. So I guess that is the good part. I just don't think my body intended me to get as little sleep as I actually do. But when I am tucked into my husband's embrace, and we're not talking about a side hug or me laying next to him, but me being right between his legs with my back against his chest, he holds me like that nearly every night, and it is magic. I fall asleep almost instantaneously. He can have the television blaring and every light in the house on, and I am blissfully unaware. But if Joe so much as twitches a toe, I'm out of there. I'm awake. So obviously it's difficult because he's not a statue, and bless his heart, he tries so hard to be. But this is just one of those personal anecdotes about energy fields outside of the body. I have one more of those. And this was when I was a child. I had cause to hide. And sadly, this was frequently. And I learned to do this thing that I called at the time in my little child brain, pulling myself inside of myself. Listen, I have always been good at naming things, right? So basically, what I would do is visualize and then feel me pulling my essence back inside of myself. My heart rate would slow, and I just imagined that I was a tight little ball where nothing could get out. It worked. I didn't know anything about anything back in those days. I was just a little girl who had a natural sense that in order to escape the big bad, I had to pull all of me into the tiniest, tightest ball that I could. And though I had no clue that I was drawing my energy field back inside of me, I guess I was always inquisitive enough to test things out, because when I was playing like hide and seek with other kids, I'd also do the same technique. But I wasn't only an excellent hider, I was very, very fast. So when I was ready to be found, I would push this energy that I'd drawn inside back out, and I could watch people's heads just turn around immediately. They would spot me. And I never thought much about it at the time. It was just something fun. And that's to me how things worked. But now that I'm older and I've studied different things and do yoga and meditation and that sort of stuff, I realized what was happening. And so it's pretty cool. Also, we know that objects themselves have and hold energy. Energy can be transferred to objects. So, for all of these reasons, I believe telekinesis is theoretically possible. Do I think you can whip a ball of energy into a frenzy? Yes. Do I think this ball of energy can then become sentient? No. I imagine the energy being whipped up is drawing other things to it, and that super creeps me out. So I'm not going to talk about it anymore. Just rest assured that if you have a poltergeist situation, You created it, and you might also be a witch, one capable of shutting that haunting down before those walls around you start to shake and those who shall not be named arrive. While you are handling your hauntings, please also subscribe to the show, like, rate, review, and follow me in spirit or on social media platforms that I occasionally pay attention to. You can find me by using some form of LeeDonna or by visiting leedonnabooks.com. You can also email me at leedonnabooks@gmail.com. It is LeeDonna Books on YouTube as well as Immortal Monsters on YouTube. Thank you for listening. I appreciate all of you. And remember to choose poltergeist over spiders.
Immortal Monsters.